What's up and welcome to QnA, the show where I take your questions from YouTube, Twitter, and answer them here in video format. A lot of questions to get into, a lot of questions about the Browns' future, defensive coordinator, all of that stuff. So I just want to get into it. And again, if you want to make sure you can ask the questions, make sure you're subscribed and notified. Click the bell there so you can get your questions in. Also, just want to give a shout out to the patreon.com/dogchecktier members. So down here. But without further ado, let's jump into it. And we're going to start with this question from KA, who says, which DC prospect that we interviewed so far was my favorite for this team and why? Also, is there any we haven't interviewed yet, and could there be possibilities later? Now, look, I'm not trying to here's where I have to be with this whole defensive coordinator thing for content purposes. I don't think it's fair for me to actively pull for one defensive coordinator candidate over the other. I get why fans are going to do it, or people who are just having fun with this are going to do it. Like, I'm not trying to shade y'all, but for my purposes, is somebody who is going to have to come up here and in one way or another evaluate the job that whatever defensive coordinator has. I don't think it's fair for me to pull in one direction or the other, right? Because let's say I was really pulling for Brian Flores to be the defensive coordinator, and Brian Flores doesn't get the job, and then the new defensive coordinator has a couple of bad games. Is it me evaluating if the defensive coordinator is doing a good job, or is that me still being mad that they didn't hire the person that I thought they should hire? So for me, in order to make sure that my opinion about whoever this defensive coordinator is based on what they do and not who they are, I'm going to stay away from having a favorite for this team to hire, because it could be Brian Flores, it could be Sean Desai, it could be Jim Schwartz. I don't know. And quite frankly, one of the reasons I feel strongly about doing that is I don't feel strong enough that I know enough about these guys, even somebody well-known like Brian Flores, to really have that strong of a stance on that would kind of compromise my ability to be partial in evaluating these guys. So I'm going to stay out of picking a favorite. I have put out what my traits are and what I would like to see, but ultimately what I want to see is a good defense, and whoever can bring that to the table, however they do it, is the way that it gets done. And I'm not really going to be too particular on that. I would love to see more of a focus on the defensive line. I think that's something that could be helpful for this team. I've said it for the last 3 years. It's nothing new here. And I think whoever they bring in is probably going to have a strong focus on that, because all of these guys have had a history of having strong defensive lines. So we'll see. We'll see what happens here. But that's why, I don't want to be picking a favorite for this, right? And that's not me saying, oh, I'm not just going to reveal my favorite. I don't have a favorite for the defensive coordinator position. Like, I've tried to stay away from getting into that mindset of, oh, it has to be this guy or it has to be that guy. Because when you do that and you don't get that guy, you spend a lot of time punishing whoever they do hire for not being the person that you wanted. Whether that's right or wrong, that's what we do. So I want to stay away from that. This past experience has taught me to not really get too specific in my wants and desires for those kind of positions. Head coach is a little bit different, right? Draft picks, you have to kind of say, hey, I like this player, but you can't put it's live or die if we don't get this player, right? It'd just be nice to get him. Because I see that a lot, honestly, with media, especially local media. And like one of the biggest offenders of this, I think, is like Tony Grossi and like that whole ESPN 850 crew. Well, not the whole one, like the really big show crew, where they will come up with who they feel like the perfect candidate is, right? Grossi Rizzo and Goldhammer. They'll come up with who they think is the number one candidate in their head. And if the Browns don't get him, they'll spend all summer, all year complaining, I can't cuss, complaining about how that dude isn't that guy when we don't even know yet. I don't want to become that kind of a channel, right? That's exactly what I don't want to cover the team. Like, I want to be as far away from that as possible because I don't find that style to be something that's actually good for the game overall. The next question comes from Nathaniel, who says, is it possible that Jakeem Grant could be back as a returner this year? I know the Achilles injury can be tough to come back from. Love the show. Yeah, man, Achilles injury at 30, and then the worst part is he got at the end of camp. So, I mean, even if he does get back, it's usually a calendar year to get back from that. At that age, it's hard to really get back from that kind of an injury. I think he's cooked. I think it's done for him, especially like his strength was like his speed and his quickness. I just don't see it for him. I think that might have been close to a career-ending injury, unfortunately, for him. Mar with the next question says, do you think the reason for Stefanski not running the ball much the last 6 games was to get Watson extra reps? I don't think it was specifically to get Watson extra reps as much as it was for the team to get extra data on Watson. And what I mean by that is you need to run as many plays as possible with them out there if you only have 6 games so you can figure out what works, what does not work, right? Once the Browns were out the playoff race, and when I say out the playoff race, once they could not control their playoff destiny by winning their own games, right? Like once it became if this, then that, then this, then that playoff hopes, that's what I mean. You're pretty much out of it at that point. But once it became that, the goal was no longer to make the playoffs. The goal was, hey, we need to figure out as much as possible about how this offense can operate with Deshaun Watson in order to make sure that 2023 is the year where we're going to be able to play great offensive football, right? So I think a lot of it was troubleshooting, right? All right, we'll see what he does in this. We'll see what he does in that. All right, let's put him in this situation, this and that. So I think that's why some of the results were pretty ugly because they were troubleshooting some stuff. Because you don't necessarily want Watson to do only the stuff that he's comfortable with. You want him to get out of his comfort zone, find some new things, right? You want to add to it. That's how he can get better. And I think that was part of it, right? And I think I would defend that decision. Once you're out the playoffs, you shouldn't be running the ball a ton, especially when you have a lot to learn about a quarterback you just traded 3 first-round picks for. You got to spend that time, if you're not in the playoff hunt, on figuring out what's going to get you in the playoff hunt next year. And what's going to get us in the playoff hunt next year isn't just Nick Chubb running the ball well. And let's be honest, Nick Chubb knows how to do that, right? He don't need extra reps. It's going to be Deshaun Watson being able to spin it in this offense like he has before. Darius Tony says, I know you said a couple times that Greg Newsome to return the boundary, but do I have a wish list for a name to replace? I really don't. When it comes to nickel DB, I think we make too much of it. It's one of those positions we hype up for no reason. And football has like a few of these. We hype up slot receiver sometimes. We hype up slot corner. Every once in a while, we'll start hyping up free safety or like center, right? We'll act like, we'll say things like this is the real most important position on the field when the most important positions on the field have always been left tackle, edge rusher, number 1 DB, and then star wide receiver. And then, it's always been that. But we always try to add things in there. We say things like centers or the quarterback of the offensive line, which doesn't make sense because the quarterback is the quarterback of the offense. Or we'll say like the linebacker is the quarterback of the defense when, it's true that they call out the play and they wear like the green dot. But they don't have nearly as much responsibility over the overall result of the defense than a quarterback does. It's not even close. Like a linebacker has, other than getting guys lined up, It's pretty much like they have such a small difference in a game nowadays because everything's spread out. If you want to see what I mean, like look at how little Roquan Smith is really meant for the Ravens since they traded for him. He's one of the best. So, we do this every once in a while where we hype up certain positions. A nickel DB is a nickel DB. You had MJ Stewart do it pretty well for you a couple years ago. And MJ Stewart wasn't somebody that was like a big signing or anything like that. You can get somebody, a journeyman cornerback, to be able to do that and do that well. You don't need to trade for that. You don't need to sign somebody for big money for that. That's a relatively easy position to fill and one that can fill itself with a camp competition, to be honest, 9 times out of 10. That's why I did not want Greg Newsome to move to it, because I felt like the ceiling for that position is very, very low. You can only be what's so good there. I mean, look at Jalen Ramsey. Has he really been the same guy since they moved him to slot in LA? Like he's been a kind of a joke the last 3 years, and that's when they've moved him to slot. So, good corners play boundary. Bad corners or corners who have other things other than coverage to bring to the table, play the slot. Adam says, hey, Q, what free agent should we prioritize when we switch to a 3-4 as opposed to staying? I don't really think it changes anything. It doesn't change the positions, right? It might change some profiles for players, but even in defensive line, like it doesn't change much, because the Browns profile that they've looked for at 3-tech has been the same profile that you would look for at 3-tech in the 4-3, in the 3-4. You know what I mean? Long, strong. The game has really pivoted to this hybrid style of defense. And that means like even teams that run a 3-4 don't really run a nose tackle out there a lot. It's just 3-3 instead of a nose, like Pittsburgh. They're one of the few teams that actually do run a nose tackle out there. And even then, it's not a lot of snaps that Tyson Alualu was out there, and they stopped doing that at the end of the year. So I don't think it changes much, to be honest. It's not the big difference it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, you switched to a 3-4, everything got different. Now when you switch to a 3-4, it's just about alignment. It's not really about personnel, because the personnel is the same no matter what defense you run. And guys, and this is the big key, guys have gotten bigger and more athletic in the last 10 years. So what used to be somebody who was too small to play in a 3-4, but athletic enough to play in a 4-3, like those guys there's not those guys in that margin anymore. I think everybody can play everything nowadays. So a 3-tech and a 4-3 is a 3-tech and a 3-4. You know what I mean? Like it's not as difficult anymore. Stuart Moore says, leaving this here from the last QnA, Deshaun requested a trade from Bill O'Brien, sending D-Hop to the Cardinals, knowing that a trade would be thrown around. Should we go after him to be a finisher? Or do we have the cap space? Yeah, man, the salary cap space is about the overall team's ability to, the overall team's will to have it. There's always an ability to get cap space. Whether you have the will to get it is one thing. But yeah, I think that DeAndre Hopkins should be something that the Browns should really consider. They need a red zone threat, right? Somebody to take some pressure off of David Njoku. Amari Cooper's a really good wide receiver. He's never been like a red zone guy, right? This year, I think, was his best year when it comes to touchdowns, and he had like 9 or something like that, 9 or 10. So he's not a big touchdown guy, but D-Hop is. D-Hop is really good with that. He's also good with the intermediate stuff. I would worry because, like, what do you do with Donovan Peoples-Jones if DeAndre Hopkins is on the team? He doesn't really take anything from Coop, because Coop would be the over top threat, and then D-Hop would go underneath. But if D-Hop goes underneath, then where are you going to move Peoples-Jones to? Not that it's a reason not to do it, but I would 100% if they called talking about doing it and we can fit the cap. Yeah, I would do it. Sean Walker with the next question says, what's your expectation for next year? Playoffs. That's the expectation. You got to make the playoffs next year, or everybody's fired. Like, that's just going to be what it is. That's not just my expectations. It's everybody's expectations. You don't trade for a quarterback like Deshaun Watson and not expect to make the playoffs the first full year you have him as starter. You know what I mean? Got to make the playoffs. Really no excuse. Hey, Q, with Martin Emerson's rise to being a top boundary corner in the league, I wouldn't say top boundary corner in the league, but he's good. extension of Denzel Ward. Do I think we would trade Greg Newsome for a D lineman or wide receiver? Yeah, here's the thing with trading players. Let's say the Browns wanted to trade Greg Newsome and get DeAndre Hopkins. One, that's an overpay because DeAndre Hopkins was had for like a 2 and a 4, and he's coming off a PED suspension in the low year. So you could probably get him for a 4. So you don't even got to trade the player. But 2, with Greg Newsome, since he's young, some teams might want him, but player-to-player swaps are so rare because either teams are trying to get draft picks or they're trying to get players. Rarely are they trying to get both, right? So either a team is in position where they want to get as many assets as possible and offload players to get worse so they can get better draft picks, or they're in a position to capitalize and get rid of the draft picks. Swaps don't happen because of that, right? The dynamics just really don't allow for it to happen that often. So I don't think like you're going to, like, we always bring it up every offseason. Hey, should we trade this player for this player? It rarely works out like that because rarely are two teams that are going to trade with each other, especially for a big name player at a point in their rebuild to where they want to swap good players for one another. It just doesn't happen that much in the NFL. But that's it for this Q&A. You guys have a great day. Have an even better night.